Welcome to the British Ambassador's residence in Paris. Thank you very much for being here today. A few points before we start. If you need the restroom, they are in the cloakroom on the right of the entrance. There will also be water available just outside, given this warm weather. If there is a fire or an emergency, please make your way to the garden. And finally, there will be a simultaneous interpretation throughout. There are headsets just outside. If you forgot to take one when you came in and you need one, please put your hand up, and my colleagues will bring them to you. Now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to His Majesty's Ambassador, Dame Menna Rawlings.
Merci beaucoup, Pauline. Bonjour à tous et à tous. Hello, everyone. I'm Menna, the British Ambassador to France, and it's such a pleasure to see such a full house today, even if it is just a little bit warm. So apologies for that, but I hope everyone can enjoy this fantastic event on women in sport today all the same. I'd like to start off by thanking the International Working Group on Women in Sport, who have put this event together, working with our team here, our fantastic team here at the British Embassy in Paris. And I know it's been a great partnership bringing us together today. I'd also like to thank the Great Audacious Kingdom campaign for all their support, not just the great visuals, but for their work with us to help showcase the best of the UK, encouraging French people to visit, study, trade, invest, live and work in the UK. And just to say as well, how fantastic are these Olympics? Just absolutely brilliant. And yes, round of applause to Paris. Fantastic. And I was on the bridge at Pont Alexandre III this morning to see Alex Yee bring home the gold in his last gasp, dash for the finish line. And that's just one of those amazing moments that I know people across the UK will be watching. I know there's been very similar moments for our French friends and colleagues as well, and we will all remember them forever. And that is the Olympics. But on the subject today, women in sport, it was Amber Hill, British shooter, who said, "Yes, I'm a girly girl, and yes, I love sport. Time to show us girls can do both." And I really echo that because I'm the first female British ambassador to France, and woo! And I can't prove this, but I think I might be the most sports-mad British ambassador in the history of UK-France relations. So I can also do both, and I have to say my timing is perfect here, having experienced both the Rugby World Cup and an Olympics during my posting. My timing has been impeccable, I would say. But I think there are some similarities, if you like, between the world of diplomacy and the world of sport. In fact, another female British ambassador, Karen Pierce in Washington, once said, "Diplomacy is a contact sport." But when I think of those similarities and those differences, I think about women's representation in these two different worlds. So, you know, as the first female ambassador, it's probably stating the obvious to say that, you know, jobs like this were just not available to women over centuries and right through much of the 20th century. And in fact, I think diplomacy was even slower, you might say, than sport to catch on to the power of gender inclusion. So, as an example, female athletes first took part in the Olympic Games in 1900, in those games in Paris, just 4 years after the first modern Olympics took place in Athens. So of a total 997 athletes at those games in 1900, 22 women competed in 5 sports. That works out as exactly 2.2%. Not many, but it was a start. But at that time, it was totally impossible for women to participate in any way in the world of diplomacy. And that situation actually continued until 1946, when women were first able to apply for the British diplomatic service. But in fact, until 1973, if you're a woman, you had to leave diplomacy, the diplomatic service, when you got married. And if you think that was a year after Mary Peters won that stunning gold medal for Great Britain in the world's pentathlon, you can see, the differences that I'm alluding to. You might also say that sport outstrips the world of diplomacy even today when it comes to gender parity. So about 21% of ambassadors appointed globally are women. The UK is well ahead of that. We're more like 40% with female ambassadors in some of our very big posts, obviously including this one, but the US, China, Germany, Canada, and New York. But Paris, as I'm sure we all know, is the first Olympic Games where there is gender parity in terms of the competition. So out of 10,500 athletes, it is half and half in terms of men and women competing. And again, the UK is ahead of that curve, with Team GB outnumbering the men at 174 to 153. So, look how far we've come. I always think on these issues, it's important to remember the journey we've been on, as well as what we still need to do. And when I think about my own sort of sports obsession, when I was a little girl, I was completely obsessed by almost every sport, I think, except possibly horse racing. That didn't really do it for me. But I was obsessed in particular by cricket, and rugby, obviously. But Welsh rugby, as Bill, who's here, knows very well. But I was a fan of the England cricket team, a massive fan, and I had a weird obsession with Geoffrey Boycott. For those in the room who know Geoffrey is, I know you'll know that's a very odd thing, but there you go. But more seriously, I dreamed of being able to play for a proper team, but all my games were in the street outside with my two brothers. And, as an ordinary girl living in an ordinary street in northwest London, access to those opportunities weren't open to me. So I do think in thinking about gender inclusion, we also need to think about other forms of inclusion as well, including around social mobility. And full inclusion in the broader sense will enable us not just to bring on and bring up a new generation of ordinary girls, but will also make sure that the people running our sports have the access they want to the widest possible talent pool. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I don't think we can feel we've yet won the gold when it comes to gender equality, but we should celebrate the fact that we do have gender parity at these Olympics, 124 years after those 22 women showed us that it could be done. We've got some amazing speakers today who are going to be hearing from shortly, so thank you to all of you. Many of you have smashed down different barriers in different ways, in different places yourselves. I've got to say, I've been going around a lot with Team GB, and it's been brilliant to meet so many women involved in leadership roles in UK sport. It's really great to see, and that also gives me lots of inspiration for the future. So just one last quote from Serena Williams, who said that every woman's success should be an inspiration to another, and we're strongest when we cheer each other on. So let's keep cheering each other on and keep going on this journey together. Thank you very much. And talking of cheers, let's give a very warm welcome to Anna Marie Phelps, Chair of the International Working Group on Women and Sport. Welcome to the stage, Anna Marie.
Thank you very much to His Majesty's Ambassador, Dame Mina Rawlings. Mina, if I may, thank you so much for hosting us today in this beautiful residence, reputedly the most beautiful British residence in the world. We're delighted to be here, but it's not just because it's a beautiful residence and a beautiful place. It's actually the very warm welcome that you've given us and the British team and your staff here, and the sort of care and attention that you've done to look after us and to really throw yourself into the Olympics and be part of it has been absolutely fantastic. So thank you. And thank you also to all of you, to all of our guests. It's a real privilege to have you all in the room. I know how busy you all are. I know how much is going on. The games can be all-consuming and totally immersive, and to have got so many of you pulled out of the sport today to be here, I think is a really fantastic sign of how important this topic is. And for us, it's a real sort of reward for the sort of work that we at IWG think is important. Let me just give you, for those of you who don't know the IWG, which is the International Working Group on Women in Sport, but IWG is easier and shorter. For those of you who don't know us, it is the largest network of organisations who have committed and dedicated themselves and resource to promoting gender equality within sport. We are now a network that's been together for 30 years, and we really focus and think our strengths are around connections, insight, leadership, and advocacy. So if you haven't already joined the network, please do. There is a there should be a QR code, is there? Coming up shortly, which means you can add your details to our newsletter. If you're not the right person in your organisation, please encourage your diversity and inclusion teams and leadership people in that area to do so. And let's work together, because I think it's something that we know is a global issue, but with some really specific and local resolutions and ideas to get things done. Today, we want to focus on federations. So many of you are from international federations here, gathered in Paris during these amazing games. And we've heard an awful lot about gender parity, gender balance, gender equality over these games. But in spite of some fantastic steps that we've taken, we all know that we're not job done yet. There's still work to do. So we're really keen to shine a spotlight on some of the federations who are doing really well in this field. And we have some fantastic caliber of speakers here today to share with us what they have done and how they've done it so well, and maybe share with us, perhaps, even some of the challenges that they've faced. So let me start with rugby. I am really thrilled that we have Sybil Beaumont, GBEDL, with us today, Chair of World Rugby. Bill, please do come and join us on the stage. Sally Horrocks, who is Chief of Women's Rugby at World Rugby. And, of course, we wouldn't be anywhere with people like Aurélie Grasselot, former international player and current international referee. I hope I pronounced it right. Please do take a seat. I should have done this before, but excuse me 1 moment. So, Bill, let me start with you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and huge congratulations on two successful Rugby Sevens tournaments in the last few days. You can hear the Stade de France from several miles away, I'm sure. It has been phenomenal. And seeing that number of spectators crowding into the Stade de France to watch a women's rugby tournament, for me, is unprecedented. Certainly, I don't know. I'm sure you'll tell us the numbers. But it was amazing, and to see all of those young boys and girls taking inspiration from what was a phenomenal tournament. So I just want to sort of take you back a little, if I can, for my first question. You started, if you don't mind me saying, you started playing in the 1970s.
Early. No, late 70s.
So, but making your first debut in, I think, 1975, which was only just after, in England, the Football Association actually took the ban off women playing football. You've been an enormous advocate for women in rugby. Can you just tell us a little bit about what things you see have changed, how you've championed that change in rugby? And I'm really interested because for all these people here, how did you start some of those really difficult conversations in rugby about the need for change?
Well, I think it's, if you looked around any rugby union, federation, sort of committees or council, then 20 years ago, it would all be men, without a doubt. And all of the same age group. And what we did, I took over as chair of World Rugby 8.5 years ago now. And we realized that actually the women's game was totally unrepresented in our sport. And as you alluded to earlier, that sort of, who would have thought 8.5 years ago there would have been 135,000 people watching 2 sessions on Monday at the Stade de France for women's rugby, and 66,000 people yesterday attended. The highest ever spectators for women's rugby. I think the previous high to that was 52,000 at Twickenham for England against France. So that just shows how the game has grown. And can I just say, how good is the product? People tend to forget about that mates of mine said, well, you're going to watch some women play rugby. I said, no, I'm going to a rugby match. And I think that is the difference. And so we had a governance review. We looked at our committee structures. I think about 40% of all our committees are chaired by women. Our balance in staff within World Rugby is 50-50, male and female. We now have 18 female council members on our board. And so I think we've gone on a journey which I think has taken us to a place where we were yesterday. And it will continue to get bigger. There's a World Cup in England, opening game in Sunderland. For those of you who don't know where Sunderland is, it's a little tourist resort in the northeast of England, on the coast, where that's the opening game, where England will play their opening game. And hopefully, with a final at Twickenham, which will break all records, subject to the local team being in it. But I can't comment on that, obviously, with the His Majesty's ambassador being Welsh. I can't say anything about that easy. But that is the journey we've been on. 42,000 at Eden Park 18 months ago for the Black Ferns beating the Red Roses. So rugby has come a long way.
It definitely feels like it's fairly central to our sporting culture now, the women's rugby, as much as the men's has ever been. But can I ask you, Bill, what sort of challenges did you come across? Is there anything you can sort of share with the people that are in the room about how you navigated some of those difficult moments when there must have been people who just didn't believe it could happen?
Well, there's certain areas where sort of it is challenging for women's team sport. There are certain countries where it would be a challenge. But what we tried to do is show the upside of our sport. The great thing about our sport is that it doesn't matter what colour you are, doesn't matter what religion you are, doesn't matter what your background is, you're actually accepted for what you contribute to the game and what you do on the rugby field or in administration off the field. That's what counts. That is the values of our sport. And so what we also do is we have used the incentive of funding, and let's not deny it, that we say to some unions that if you don't invest in a women's program, then you're not going to get the same funding as another country, because they're investing a lot of money into women's sport. So why don't you follow? And so now we have, who would have thought 10 years ago that China would have beaten GB? Who would have thought that? Yeah. And actually, what has that done for the sport in Asia? That would have grown the sport. And think yesterday, the US team, on the medal podium, somebody came up and said, I'm going to give £4 million to your sport in funding to take you through to the next Olympic cycle. Headlines in Canada about the women there. So it just shows the power of sport. And there is no difference between men and women, girls and boys.
And do you think it's changed people's views within rugby, those people that are within it, the ones who are the naysayers? Have they changed their minds? Are they coming around?
I think without a doubt, that sort of, look, there are challenges, as I say, in certain sort of areas, but I always quote my granddaughter, who's the only girl in a boys under-10s team. And so she could carry on playing until she is 12, and then she'd have to go to an all-girls team. And I said, Annie, you are the future. And she said to me, I know I am, Grandad.
So, on that then, Sally, I mean, tell me about your role. What's your role in the developments and in producing the future for Bill's granddaughter?
It's a big mission, Bill, that you've set us. So thank you very much, Ambassador. And colleagues, this is a fantastic room to be in. Can I just say, I think someone said it was their dream guest list. I think it was Lisa, one of your board members. So we've got so many provocateurs in the room, and agitants and lobbyists and supporters. So it's a real pleasure to be here. The role is Chief of Women's Rugby, and essentially it's to grow the global game. And there are 3 facets to that, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but that's growing the participant base, the girls, Annie, your granddaughter, Bill, and making those opportunities available, and coaches and officials that you'll hear from orally on. So growing the global game through the participant base. It's also growing the fan base through showcase events, through our partnerships with the IOC, through the Rugby World Cup that Bill talked to, through the HSB 7 series. So these magic moments that inspire our athletes and showcase the brilliance of those female players on the pitch, incredible. But that drives the fans and the audience. And I don't know if you were able to attend the Stade de France, but it felt incredible over the last few days. There's a younger audience, there were lots of children, and it didn't feel like a traditional, forgive me, Bill, but 15s game of rugby played in England 10, 15 years ago. There was a modern, progressive vibe in the room, in the stade.
No blazers there.
Very few blazers. But I think that's the point of difference. So that's the second area, the fan base. And the third area, before we get to culture, which we will, is driving revenue. Because through those initiatives, we need to drive revenue to grow our sport. Running a sport is expensive, running a club is expensive, running a girls' team is expensive. So we're trying to drive revenue, and that's not just commercial revenue, it's not just visibility with our media partners and our brands that share our vision. It's also government agencies, third-party agencies, partnerships with the IOC who help with their WISH program, fund some of our coaching initiatives. Partnerships with the IWG and the Brighton Declaration. So working together in partnership drives revenue and investment to the sport, and that's a hugely important part of what we do. But the bit that holds that together, which I know you're keen to tackle with us today, is the culture. It's the glue that holds us together. And those may be the 3 initiatives that I lead for the global game, but changing the culture of our sport so that it is more inclusive, so that its leadership and governance structures that Bill spoke to are progressive and modern and inclusive, not just of women. I think, Damien, you spoke to that. It's inclusive of all shapes, sizes, colours, races, age. So to that point on culture, changing culture, as I've seen over the last 20 years, we've come a long way, but there are definitely challenges ahead. We have more to do.
And Sally, what's your standout sort of learning? What surprised you? I mean, either as a challenge or as a response to what you're trying to do. What's your sort of standout?
So I've been with rugby for 2 years. Previous to that, I probably spent the best part of 15 years helping to grow women's soccer around the world with FIFA, UEFA, and the English Football Association. So moving to rugby was a really exciting move, and it was to do with the vision for change for the next 10 years. So rugby set out a pathway in the 15s game and the sevens game, which is what we saw in the Stade yesterday, for rapid growth. And for me, I mean, the Olympics is where the two collide. Two of our growth priorities collide. The single biggest strategic driver for growth in rugby, as stated by our board and championed by Bill, is women and the women's game. So that being so clear as a primary objective, that absolutely excited me to join. I knew that was the case in other sports, but to be so bold and brave and state that as an ambition made a huge difference, because it's sort of show, not tell. It's okay telling people, but you've got to show people, you've got to execute. And then the second bit was the clarity of the planning. It's really hard to plan ahead, but with rugby we had a 10-year roadmap that involved gender parity in the sevens game, 12 men's teams, 12 women's teams, equal pay, equal playing field, rotating between the two on a World Series. I mean, outstanding. I looked at that and thought, wow, if that's the way we're going to go, that led here, that will lead to 2028, tremendously exciting. So it was show, not tell, and having a 10-year, long-term, intentional plan, really intentional. Culture change, leadership change, governance change doesn't happen by accident. And we've had to have some tough conversations. Happy to pick those up with people to follow on.
Thanks, Sally. Aurélie, bienvenue. Let me just come to you. You started your career as a player, and then when I think you had an injury and stopped playing, you became an official very young age and have worked as an official and a referee both in the men's game and in the women's game at the very top level. So you must have seen incredible changes in rugby during your career. I understand that the official role is something that France are really doing well now. Can you tell us a little bit about how France is leading the way and the sorts of changes that have led to where you are now?
I'm very lucky to be here today. I speak French. Yeah. Les choses ont
Absolutely. Things have changed a great deal for years now. When I started as a referee, I was definitely the only woman. And back then, it was sometimes extremely difficult. Rugby was dominated by men, and many men did not understand how a woman could actually be in the middle of a group of 32 men. Things have changed immensely in rugby, but not only. Rugby is a great example. Things have started to change a number of years ago, and today we would like to have more officials, more referees. Things, again, are changing. The messages I receive today are messages of excitement, of support. I have many people tell me, wonderful job. Thanks to you and through women like you, women are represented. I've been refereeing in second division, national division for men, and there are 32 of us. I'm the only woman. So we have a long way to go, very long way to go when it comes to encouraging and supporting women in refereeing. But things are changing. The perception of the general public is changing.
Like a very supportive now environment, more so than perhaps when you first started. But what challenges are there still that need to be faced by women in becoming an umpire, a referee?
Yeah. Oui, parce qu'aujourd'hui là.
Well, my second job is to develop women refereeing. Only 7% of referees are women. My objective is to help women become referees, officials, and I do this by reaching out to young female rugby players to convince them that refereeing is very much is part and parcel of rugby. You can be a rugby player, but you could just as well be a referee and still be in rugby. So I'm a referee, but I feel a bit like a player. And being a referee doesn't mean it's the end of your career. It's really a choice, a deliberate professional choice I've made.
To draw these questions, and we will have time later on for a Q&A with Aurélie and Sally. We have to say sadly goodbye to Bill, because thank you, Bill, so much for being here. I know you're rushing off to get a plane, but it's been a real privilege to have you here. Thank you. If I've got time, I'm just going slightly over time, so I hope Sabrina's all right here. Sally, I want to ask you just one more question. How can World Rugby help share the change?
Thanks for the prompt. You spoke about the purpose, Anna-Marie, of connection when you introduced the topic today. So for us at World Rugby, it's really important that we work with partners, other federations, with players, with athletes. So from our perspective, back in New Zealand in 2022, when our last World Cup was hosted, we went just before your last summit, global conference, which was tremendous for those of you that attended. It was incredible. And we hosted our own shorter summit with 300 plus leaders in rugby from around the world. So that will happen again in England next year for Rugby World Cup 2025. And by the way, shout out, that's an almost exclusively female management team that's running the Rugby World Cup 2025, just to reference a number of amazing women in the room today. So if we can share the change, if we can share insight, connections, we can open that conference up to a wider audience. We have an amazing network of 300 plus women and men sharing insights and information on women's sport. There are many platforms, but we are very, very happy to share our learnings and that information, and also to make that collaborative working possible. So please reach out to us. We can give you information. Atlanta St. John, one of my colleagues, head of programs, and Claire Burrell are with us today, who also sits on your board. So we would love to work with other federations, because this is about creating a movement, in our opinion, and leadership starts from the top. We have amazing leaders in the room, but if you would like to work with us, with each other, reaffirm our commitment to the Brighton Declaration, we would love to have you, see you in England next year and work with you through the next 4, 8, 10 years that will really be, we'll really realise this movement, this change that we're all so passionate about and part of.
Sally, thank you. And thank you both for your insights. I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, just to stay in your seats until we come back to you for questions in a bit. But if I may now, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Sabrina Ibanez, who is the Secretary General of the Fédération Equestrienne Internationale, FEI, the Equestrian Federation. Sabrina, if I can just give you a very short. The FEI, equestrian, is a completely different situation in a way to rugby. It's a sport where men and women compete against one another. It has a long history of women working together with men, and yet you still see the need to make a really deliberate, intended effort to ensure that your leadership is inclusive. So we're really looking forward to hearing you speak now about how the FEI is managing this.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me. Your Excellency, thank you very much for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, and our friend male allies that are here with us today. Most definitions about sport include the term of fairness. You have a sporting chance, it means you have a real opportunity of winning. A good sport means somebody who can play fair. Oh, we got that. Just change that. Here we go. And that's probably why I fell in love with equestrian sport 52 years ago. Because it was a sport where men, boys and girls, competed alongside and against each other. And I thought that was just marvelous. I was not different between my brothers and my sisters. We were all competing together. And it is the only Olympic sport where women and men compete alongside and against each other. So there is that principle of equality already there. But it hasn't not always been the case. Equestrian sport has been in the Olympic movement, in the Olympic program since 1900, but it was only in, 1912, but it was reserved really for military officers. And it was only in 1952, at the Helsinki Games, where women for the first time were allowed to compete alongside the officers. And we had 4. And one of them was extraordinary. Her name was Liz Hartle. Liz Hartle came from an equestrian family, and she was really trained by her mother. And at the age of 23, she contracted polio. And she was pregnant at the time. So she gave birth to a very healthy child, and she wanted to continue to ride. And medical advice at the time were like, you're crazy, don't do it. Your knees, your hands, your arms, this is really not a good story for you. And she did not listen to them. And she continued to compete nationally. And therefore, she competed at these games in '52, and she went on to win the silver medal. A beautiful story is that when she was trying to dismount her horse, she was unable to do it. So the officer, Sansir, from Sweden, actually went up to her, dismounted her, and carried to the podium. And of course, you can imagine the incredible uproar that there was in the audience when they saw this happening. She not only won the silver medal in '52, but she went along and won one in '52 in Melbourne. So another thing that probably attracted me to equestrian sport and has kept my love for equestrian sport so adamant over the years is that we have this principle of guardianship. We must put the care and the needs of others before our own. We need to do that in order to ensure that the horse understands our needs and remains with us, and that we can compete as one. So that issue of empathy is very strong in our sport. Diversity and inclusion also require the concept of equality and guardianship. But what is the difference between diversity and equality? So as Verna Myers properly said, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And it really is a simple way of explaining it, and I think it's beautiful. So why is diversity so important for sport? Well, because sport is a microcosm for society. And the inequalities that we see on the field of play bring awareness to wider societal problems. And I think the London 2012 Games and the active participation of Channel 4 there, which really achieved mass market appeal to really promote inclusiveness, really showed that you can make a difference. Because after those games, 6 years later, 1 million people with disabilities were employed in the UK. So that just goes to show. Sport is also recognized as a human right. So all of us involved one way or the other in sport have really a moral obligation to tear down the barriers and make it diverse and inclusive. But it also really makes good business sense. As you can hear from the president of Rugby, I mean, look at this. The stadiums were full. It's making money. Women's rugby is making money. So we know for a fact that businesses that include 30% of women in leadership positions, they excel 12 times better than those that do not. There are better problem-solving skills, stronger governance structures, but really, productivity only goes up. Excuse me. But productivity only goes up when people really feel comfortable and they can be their authentic selves. And what does authenticity really mean? It really means being comfortable who you are at home and who you are at work. Because, for example, if you have to hide your sexual orientation at work, you're not going to give it your all. That's for sure. So it's easier to be an active participant if you feel accepted and if your opinions are valued. Sports structures, excuse me, have traditionally been designed around men for men, and that's not surprising that we have an overabundance of male representation in sports governing organizations, broadcasting, sponsors, corporate sponsors, coaches, management, training. But we do see that there is changes nowadays, and as we're hearing it today from our colleagues, we hear about unequal pay as well, and all sorts of challenges. But one of the things that we're only very recently talking about is recognizing women's unique physiological needs, nutritional, and also clothing needs. I mean, for instance, in equestrian sport, for the first time ever, and I don't know why we didn't think about this before, and I'm the one who brought it up, we need to change the color of the jodhpurs or the pants. They're white. And it's interesting because the other day at a board meeting, one of the board members looked at me, he's like, Sabrina, why are we doing that? And I'm like, are you serious? Anyways, so we are talking about menstrual cycles, we are talking about perimenopause, we are talking about menopause, and how that affects women. And it's important. But a few years ago, no, I mean, even 4 years ago, no one was talking about that. So, but then again, how can we expect that our experiences are understood and met if there are so few of us in the governing bodies? And that's a fact. I am one of 8 Secretary Generals of an international sports organization summer. I see my colleague, where are you? From Judo, you're here, Judo. Anyways, you're somewhere here in the room. And I mean, that's just ridiculous. There's only 3 women who are the presidents of international sports organizations. So, I mean, it is a bit complicated. Of course, if you see a woman up there, you're like, well, if she can do it, well, so can I. That's for sure. But I might as well tell you that in the beginning, when I was offered the job, I was like, no way. I don't want it. I don't want to get old. I don't want gray hair. I don't want to gain weight. I'm not going to do it. I see what it does to secretary generals. But I'm glad that I did. Because I have seen the change. Again, if she can do it, I can do it. We have now 40% applications coming in for our committees and board members, which we didn't have before. We only had about 25%. So it really is important. Representation really is important, as was mentioned before. But if we want to see real change, well, then we need to engage more men and work with them. Recently, I was in a seminar, and the title of the seminar led to the fact that there weren't that many men in the seminar. So basically, we were a bunch of women talking to women, promoting women. And that's nice. We can exchange ideas. We can have a drink afterwards. But we need men along us to really change the culture. And that's why I'm very pleased to see some men here with us today. So thank you very much. I am very fortunate to have my president, President Ingmar de Vos, convinced me that I could also do it my way. Because I was a bit afraid before that I had to change, that I had to act a certain way. And he's like, no, just be yourself, be authentic. And it's true, we don't always see eye to eye. We come from very different cultural backgrounds. I'm Hispanic. I grew up in El Salvador in Central America. Living in Switzerland now for 30 years. He's Belgium. But it's that what makes it beautiful. That's what, having diverse opinions is what, and I think that's what makes it such an effective team. Now I want to talk about, I want to talk about privilege and allyship. So I think this is important. What is privilege? Well, Professor Michael Kimmel said, privilege is transparent for those who have it. So it means that you have a set of unearned benefits that is enjoyed by a certain group. And most of us don't realize it, even us women, that we do have privilege. It doesn't mean that we haven't worked hard to get where we have gotten. It doesn't mean that we have experienced hardship, but we do have privileges. So in order to be an ally and help somebody, you need to acknowledge your privilege. I mean, I'm sure in this room, the vast majority of you are right-handed. And that's already a privilege. If you ask a left-handed person to use a pair of scissors for right-handed, it's very, very difficult. So it's just really taking a step and acknowledging it. And it's not something that one day you wake up and you're like, okay, today I'm going to be an ally. No, 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 no. This is something that has to be done on a regular basis. So being able to acknowledge what your privilege is and trying to put yourself in the other person's position is really, really important. However, that's nicely said, perhaps, or not. But in order to promote and to be an ally of somebody, you really need to be strong. And you need to know yourself quite well to see, and maybe develop your own toolbox to see how you can help others. So, and one thing that I would like to emphasize here too, which I always do, is that allyship is not about men supporting women. It's not just about that. It's also about women supporting women. As in the words of Madeline Albrecht, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. So, so all of you today will be in a position probably, or you are in a position today to actually help somebody at one point in your lives. And when you do, I really do hope that you will do it. Because remember, it's really, really important to send that elevator down. Thank you very much.
Sabrina, thank you so much for sharing those insights and especially for broadening the discussion into a much more broader sort of diversity subject, which I think is really important for all of us when you look at the four of us sitting here at the moment, particularly. So I think that's really important. We have a few minutes for questions for any of the panelists, if anybody has a question.
Hello, my name is Min Jung Kim. Thank you very much for this discussion, really enlightening. I'm actually a bit of a joke in the pack here because I'm not from the sports industry. I'm a pianist from the culture. And you mentioned that in sports that visibility is so important. And it's the same, I mean, I totally agree it's the same in culture. And the soft power that we can explore together. So what I'd like to ask is what is being encouraged through education of our youngsters in order to encourage them to break down the gender barrier in sports, like so much is trying to be done in culture as well.
Sally, is that one for you to start?
Thank you for the question. I certainly can start. So within rugby, visibility is my first priority. If I look at my work plan for the year and how our central team is judged, we have agreed that building visibility so that people know that girls can play rugby, that it's okay to sweat, to wear different clothes, to get dirty, and culturally in lots of different countries, that's just not acceptable. Mothers do not want their girls to do that, not just fathers. So visibility and that education and changing perceptions is probably our number one priority, which then leads to driving participation. But in terms of how we're doing it in our sport, and everyone will be different, we're trying to do that through using athlete voices. So women are particularly good at connecting with other women and standing out and speaking passionately and carefully and thoughtfully, I think, about why it's good for girls to play. So we're encouraging our athletes to speak out. We're a team sport. Often people hide behind a team, but we're trying to encourage those athletes to speak out. So athlete voice, really important. And then what we're also doing is we're creating bespoke girls programs because the girls want to do it differently. They want to be coached differently. They want to be welcomed differently into their sports. So I'm sure that's not the complete answer, but those are a couple of things that we're doing right now.
Thanks, Sally. Aurélie, can I ask you, just moving on from Sally's points there, how has the visibility of women's rugby, as it's increased, impacted you, and particularly as there are an increasing number of referees in the sport. How have you seen that change?
World Rugby a mis
Well, I think when it comes to refereeing for women, things really changed. The World Cup New Zealand, for the first time, was refereed, arbitrated by women. In the past, man would actually referee women's games, and that changed. You may have seen that we've had more and more referees who are actually refereeing games or matches where only men are playing. So this is really something that changed. I don't think we would have seen female referees at such a high level a few years ago. So I think there's been really a lot of change in that matter. We have a real staff, we have coaches who are there to help us grow and develop. We have a mental coach, we have a physical coach who's there to support us and continue to grow and really find our place in the world of rugby. I think rugby is a great example for all sports federations. It's the same thing's not happening in all federations. Recently, I had to fight. I've been a professional for a year, but before a year ago, I was traveling worldwide. But at the same time, I had to have a job. I worked as a farmer on the side. I still work as a farmer on the side. But World Rugby has been working very actively with federations to make us professional referees, which allows us to do this as a full-time job.
That career as a farmer is what's given you some drive and getting used to up early morning training.
Marie, I'm sorry, could I just call out the media, just very briefly on visibility? I know we've got a lot of media colleagues and journalists in the room. The way music and culture and maybe sport is presented by the media as well is really important. So I just wanted to shout it out because I think we've got some great supporters in the room that do a great job in presenting and carrying those relationships and favour is really important.
Thanks, Sally. That's a really good point. I think we had a question. Maya, did you have your hand up or not? No. We have another question here at the front, the lady in white.
Thank you so much. Tania Castillo Perez. I represent a caring group on inclusion and diversity. So thank you for this very interesting conversation. I think it was Sabrina who mentioned, well, I think maybe all of you, the fact that diversity comes in many forms and the socioeconomic background is one of them. And we all know that in the political environments that are ours in France, but also quite everywhere, I could say, throughout the world, it's important that sports bring together people. And I was a teenager swimmer, I was telling my neighbor, I really enjoyed that and felt that truly as a means for empowerment, personally speaking. It has never left me. So I would like to ask our beautiful panel, how do you see, for example, Aurélie, comment vous voyez le rugby?
How do you see rugby moving forward? In France, rugby is perceived, it's a perception, not necessarily a reality, but rugby is perceived as a sports for a specific part of society. Other sports for other parts of society, not the same audience. So Aurélie, the question is for you and also for the other speakers. How do you think sports can overcome these boundaries? It's really mainly a question of perception at the end of the day, I think. I agree, completely agree. And it's true that only some people watch rugby for various reasons. Some people consider the rules are too difficult to understand. I was at the Stade de France earlier this week for the Olympics, rugby sevens, for example. All of a sudden made it possible for a much broader audience to understand and watch and enjoy rugby. We've been working a lot with in underprivileged neighborhoods to show them about rugby. to kids who only play football. We show them what rugby is like. So things are changing little by little. We're very fortunate. We now have Antoine Dupont, who is getting a lot of media attention, and he has been not only working with younger boys, but also young girls to create that exposure, create that visibility. Also in schools, where rugby is very common. If you take rugby in southern France, you see a lot of rugby, more so. But once you go north of Bordeaux, you see fewer rugby fields and rugby practice. But things are changing, definitely changing. And I think one of our objectives is to do this nationwide. I was having a conversation with Bill earlier. Vannes in Brittany is about to become the first division. So it's not just the city of Vannes, it's really the entire region which is going to, support the Vannes team. And this is one step forward for the development of rugby. I think we really need to work all together, hand in hand, to include more and more people to support sports and rugby. I was having a conversation earlier with someone. I also work with a rugby school in a small city, and I've seen young kids who were challenging, socially challenged, and rugby was one way for them to acquire stability, a social status. On top of rugby, we give them evening classes to help them with their learning difficulties. We help them reconnect with their families. So rugby also has a very important social role to play to help kids sometimes get the education they're not getting at home and become better grown-ups.
Sabrina, is there anything you wanted to add? I know you've talked a bit about broader inclusion, but I guess in terms of perception and visibility, we tend to perceive equestrian sports as really being for more wealthy socioeconomic groups. And are there things that federations can learn from what's happening?
And absolutely, there are very wealthy people who practice our sport. I mean, we're not going to deny it. But there are also those who really worked hard and who started as grooms. And national federations themselves have a lot of different programs in order to find that talent. Another thing that we because there is such a special relationship with the horse, and because the horse can really provide miracles, really, because with therapeutic riding and whatnot. We have a lot of programs as well for the underprivileged at the FEI in different countries, but it really is working with the national federations themselves and making sure that they have those programs so that they can actually put them down through their clubs. But yeah, I mean, it is true that perception is that way, but in reality, I would say it's 50-50. There are so many riders out there that actually got a horse for a very inexpensive amount. I'm going to say 5,000 euros, which is crazy. I mean, it's really not much for a horse. We had an Equestrian at the Pan American Games who bought his horse for 1 franc. I mean, it is also about that relationship with the horse. But yes, indeed, it is breaking those barriers. And I have to say, social media is very difficult, but at the same time, it is an opportunity to show those other stories as well and change the overall perspective.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, we have one. Just at the front here, the lady in the dark blue dress. Oh, maybe it's easy because then she can translate.
Thank you very much. I'm a big admirer of Billie Jean King and what she did for tennis in the 70s. I wondered if you had any comments about pay and equality in women in either your sports or just generally. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think any one of the three could answer that. Sabrina, maybe.
Well, in our sport, there is no inequality. The prize money remains the same because they compete in the same competition. So it remains absolutely the same. We're lucky in that.
for us in the Sevens game, that was one of the things that attracted me to the sport, the fact that we were launching a Sevens program that had that gender parity, that equal pay and participation on very level playing field. However, that's not the case across the whole of our sport, and I certainly know it's not the case across many sports. And it is, then we go back to the economic argument in terms of the business case for investment and the modelling around a sport and whether or not then it generates sufficient revenue for reinvestment and pay. So as a priority, I spoke before to our lovely question from our pianist in the room around visibility, but the second most important priority for us at World Rugby is that equitable prioritisation in the professional and commercial development of the game. So just acknowledging it as an issue, I think, is really important. Let's hide from the fact. Look at the economic modelling, which is not equitable at the moment. But equally, I think we also have to be honest, certainly in many sports, about the vulnerability or the economic framework around the sport. And we have to work hard, but we have to work with the leagues and the clubs and the players. We need the athlete voice and representation as well around the tables. More female athlete voice around the tables is what we are working on as well. So we are not there, but I also, fangirl Billie Jean King, tremendous. But we have to call it out and work towards it. We have in sevens, we're not there in 15s.
Sally, can I ask you to sort of slightly follow up? How important do you think the role, I mean, really the role that you play as a senior leader within World Rugby, but dedicated to the women's game is? Because you haven't just sort of plonked women into a structure or you've changed the structure of the International Federation in order to be more inclusive by having that sort of focus on women.
I think not having women's sport or female athletes siloed in an organisation is quite important. So I don't sit in a department on my own with a small number of staff. We have the growth of the women's game and the growth of more women in leadership across the world as core to the purpose of the business, core to the purpose of the sport, core to the purpose of the business, as a driver for growth. Now, as it's a driver for growth, that's quite exciting for me, but for the leadership team as well. So not having it knitted through an organisation, so it's part of everyday business. It's not on the edge of someone's desk. But you do need dedicated focus to it. You need dedicated budgets. You need dedicated outcomes, to your point about sort of, are we going to get to that stage of equal pay? And when are we going to get there? If not now, when? But having more women around the table with the right level of expertise and experience, skills-based, proof points, evidence-based, is really important, in my opinion.
Thanks, Sally. Aurélie, let me just ask you about, from a refereeing perspective, do you feel that you have reached the point of equality in terms of pay and resource here in France? And what is the next step? What do you think is the next step that needs to happen to really make sure that women referees can equally take charge of any men's match in the same way as we had come before? You mentioned the men took on the women's game.
Oui, maintenant, en fait.
Yes, absolutely. We have equal wages between men and women in the French Federation, and also within World Rugby, the games bonuses are identical. There are no difference now. Now, there's still a lot to do in order for women to be accepted at the highest levels. Progressively, women are integrated in the male games. In the history of France, I'm only the second woman referring for male games, so it's still quite rare. The objective is to increase these numbers and to have women in the professional divisions, just as any man can do. the word that I like to use is that referees are not gendered, because at the end of the day, you're still a high-level sports being, a sportsman or woman. Of course, there are differences, because physically, if you take a 100 meters race, well, men and women do not have the same speed. Physically, we do not have the same rhythm, but maybe we work even more to be equal, and we work more to anticipate maybe and on other criteria which lead us to the same decision as men can make. So progressively, the way women are looked at is changing. And today in France, I see that in the relationship with the trainers. 100% of trainers in this field are men. You know, sometimes they're 2 meters high. I feel very small beside them. But sometimes they tell me, you know, you have a natural authority. So it might be that we develop other skills, other competences, because men, you know, they're already installed in that level, and we must work on our leadership. We must work on our anticipation skills. Physically, we have to work more. We have to work on a lot of criteria in order to get this equality with men. And maybe in the future, of course, we'll have to work very hard, but maybe things will be easier in the future.
Much, Aurélie. I'm going to draw the panel to a close, but I'm sure that our panelists will be here for a drink afterwards, and I realise I'm now standing between you and the air and the breeze outside. So let me say thank you very much to Sally, to Aurélie, and to Sabrina. Thank you very much for the part you've played today. Can I add to that, to thank you all for all your time today. Now really is, with Paris and the huge steps and the amount of focus that we've had, now really is the time for us to capitalize on women's sport. There are so many benefits to having a more equal sport for everybody, for the men's sport, the women's sport, for all of our organizations, and particularly for our countries, our societies, and our communities, if we have a much more inclusive sporting world. IWG, we are here to help you, and please do connect with us. Please follow us on social media. Please sign up for the newsletter and take advantage of the Insight Hub. And do please get in touch with me or with our Secretary General, Lisa, who I'm not going to ask to stand up because she's on crutches. But we are around. I want to conclude this part of today. A huge thank you to you. Please do stay and enjoy some drinks, courtesy of our fabulous ambassador and her team. It's been a real privilege to be able to be here today and to work so closely with them. I'd like to thank UK Sport too for helping facilitate today for us and putting us all in touch. And I look forward to working with you all and speaking to you all as we move through the next few years. Thank you very much. Take advantage of the garden.